Okay, so if you were scrolling through your feed today, you probably noticed the title of today's deep dive.
Yeah, the Apple Podcast title.
Right, exactly. The title is Unlocking Gale, the Hidden Database Empire in Your Local Library.
That's a pretty bold title.
It
Yeah.
is, but it totally fits. And I actually just want to read the description we put up for this one because it really sets the stage for the sources we're looking at today.
Go for it.
Okay, so the description says, ever wonder who actually builds those massive search engines and digital references you use for research? In this deep dive, we unpack the fascinating, volatile history of Gale, the publishing giant behind InfoTrac Gale OneFile, and countless multi-volume encyclopedias.
And it really is a wild history.
Seriously. It goes on to say we trace their epic journey from a 1954 Detroit startup to a multi-billion-dollar cornerstone of Cengage learning. Along the way, we explore massive corporate mergers, a staggering $7.75 billion private equity buyout, and a dramatic Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Which is just a huge roller coaster for a company that basically sells library books.
Right. And the description wraps up by saying, discover the hidden corporate architecture of the academic research, primary sources, and digital learning resources that have likely powered your own curiosity. Plus, we threw all the good SEO keywords in there, Gale Publishers, Cengage Learning Library databases,
Right.
Thomson Corporation, all that stuff.
Gotta hit the algorithm.
Exactly. But beyond the search terms, our real mission today is to look at the invisible corporate architecture of human knowledge. Because if you just picture the scenario, you're sitting at a computer, right?
Sure.
Maybe you're prepping for a corporate meeting, or you're at a university library pulling together a massive research paper.
The classic all-nighter.
Yeah, exactly. You type a query into a search bar, you hit enter, and instantly you get thousands of peer-reviewed results. Primary source documents, historical newspaper clippings.
Just an absolute avalanche of data.
Right. But have you ever actually stopped to wonder who built that system?
Most people haven't. I mean, I certainly didn't for a long time.
Right, because who went out into the world, gathered all those disparate resources, indexed them, and then built the actual digital engine that powers that search?
It doesn't just happen by magic.
No, it doesn't. So we have this massive stack of source material today detailing the comprehensive corporate history of Gale. And we are going to look at how a single company effectively corners the market on academic and library reference.
It's a huge topic.
Okay, let's unpack this, because once you see the mechanics behind the database, it completely changes how you view the information you consume.
It really forces a total perspective shift.
Yeah.
I mean, when we dig into the source material on Gale, we are not just looking at a standard corporate timeline.
No, not at all.
We are examining the actual commodification, organization, and distribution of truth.
Of truth itself.
Exactly. We tend to hold this highly romanticized view of libraries, right,
Yeah.
as these organically occurring repositories.
Yeah, like they're just these purely civic spaces where information inherently exists for the public good.
Right.
Yeah.
But the reality of modern research is that the digital resources inside those libraries, the databases, the indexes, the archives, they're built, aggregated, leased, and maintained by massive private corporate entities.
Which is a huge distinction.
It is. Gale's trajectory over the last 70 years is essentially the story of how our entire society transitioned from a model where knowledge was a stationary physical commodity to a model where knowledge is a digital asset.
A digital asset that is continuously leased.
Yes, continuously leased. You never really own it. And that shift has profound implications for how you conduct research today.
I want to start by looking at what it took to build that original physical commodity, though, because the origins of this company are just incredibly telling.
They really are.
Our sources place the founding of Gale, which was originally called Gale Research in 1954.
Mid-century America.
Right. And the founder is this guy, Frederick Gale Ruffner Jr. He starts this venture in Detroit, Michigan.
Detroit in 1954.
Yeah, and just to put a pin in the geography for a second, 70 years later, the company is still headquartered just west of Detroit in Farmington Hills.
Which is so unusual for publishing.
It is. You think of publishing, you immediately think of Manhattan skyscrapers. Or Boston literary houses.
Maybe London.
Right, London. You absolutely do not think of the Motor City.
But what's fascinating here is that geographic disconnect, because it perfectly aligns with what Ruffner was actually trying to build.
How so?
Well, think about 1954 Detroit. It was the epicenter of the American post-war industrial boom. The entire culture there was focused on the mass production of tangible, complex machinery.
Assembly lines. Auto plants.
Exactly.
Huh?
Ruffner wasn't trying to publish the next great American novel. He was trying to manufacture a utilitarian tool.
A tool for information.
Right. Think about the sheer logistical friction of doing research in 1954. If you needed to find out which trade associations existed for, say, the steel industry,
You can just Google it.
no, you absolutely couldn't query a search engine. You had to navigate a physical card catalog. And that catalog only told you what was inside that specific building.
Which is so limiting.
Incredibly limiting.
Yeah.
So Ruffner looked at this post-war explosion of organizations and industries and recognized an immense unmet need for structured information.
He saw a gap in the market.
He was basically building an analog search engine using paper binding and ink.
And the physical reality of that analog search engine is just staggering to think about.
It really is.
The early bread and butter for Gale Research were these massive multi-volume reference works. The sources highlight the Encyclopedia of Associations as the classic example.
Oh yeah, that was a giant.
We are talking about incredibly heavy, densely printed books. Imagine the sheer physical weight of the product they were selling to these libraries.
It's hard to even conceptualize today.
Right. A library wasn't just buying data. They were buying linear feet of paper that required reinforced flooring.
An extensive shelving space. The physical weight is actually the perfect metric for understanding the barrier to entry in this industry at the time.
Because it was so hard to produce.
Exactly. To produce something like the Encyclopedia of Associations in the 50s, Ruffner's team had to engage in this grueling manual process.
Right. They had to mail things out.
They mailed out thousands of paper surveys to organizations across the entire country. Then they had to just wait for the Postal Service to deliver the replies.
And hope people actually filled them out.
Right. And when they came back, they manually sorted those replies into index cards, alphabetized them by hand, and then painstakingly typeset thousands of pages for print.
It was literally an industrial assembly line for data.
It was an industrial operation. And because the barrier to creating that index was so incredibly high once Gale published it, they essentially owned that specific niche of knowledge.
Because nobody else was going to do all that work.
Right. Libraries had to buy it because they certainly didn't have the staff to compile a national index themselves.
So Ruffner creates this totally indispensable physical product. And it's wild to fast forward from that mid-century industrial operation to where we are now.
The contrast is massive.
Because the core mission, organizing human knowledge, is exactly the same today as it was in 1954. The only difference is the medium.
They just swapped paper for servers.
Exactly. They went from mailing index cards and binding heavy paper to managing global server farms in the digital cloud. And they did it all without ever leaving the Detroit area.
Which is a testament to their corporate stability in those early years.
But to make that leap from physical books to global server farms, a single founder's vision just wasn't going to be enough.
It rarely is, especially when a company proves the immense profitability of a niche market like that.
Because they'd captured the libraries.
Right. Ruffner built a highly organized, highly sought-after catalog of reference material. And in the corporate world, when you successfully corner a vital market with recurring institutional buyers.
Like academic and public libraries?
Exactly. You become a prime target for acquisition.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the consolidation phase of the publishing industry.
Right. Let's look at the 1980s and 90s, because this is where the modern architecture of the company is really forged.
This is the turning point.
According to the corporate history in our sources, the International Thomson Organization, which most people later know as the Thomson Corporation, acquires Gale in 1985.
A massive media conglomerate stepping in.
Yes. But Thomson doesn't just sit on that single acquisition. They go on to build this massive research conglomerate.
They were playing a long game.
By 1998, Thomson executes a major internal merger. They take Gale Research and they merge it with two other companies they had previously acquired.
Information Access Company and Primary Source Media.
Exactly. And together, these three entities form what they called the Gale Group.
This is a total masterclass in vertical and horizontal integration. Thomson wasn't just hoarding profitable companies, they were systematically assembling the ultimate academic research puzzle.
Piece by piece.
Let's actually break down the three pieces of that 1998 merger because it is crucial to understanding how the databases you use today actually function.
Okay, let's do it.
First, you have Gale Research. That brings the traditional multi-volume encyclopedias and the structured indexes we just talked about.
Heavy books.
Right. Second, you have Primary Source Media. Thomson had acquired them back in 1979 when they were called research publications.
And what did they bring to the table?
This division brought an incredible, vast archive of historical documents, microfilms, and original source materials.
Okay, so now you have the encyclopedia summaries plus the actual original historical documents.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because the third piece of that puzzle is Information Access Company, which Thomson bought in 1995.
The technological leap.
Yes, because Information Access Company was the publisher of InfoTrac.
InfoTrac.
I just have to pause here because for anyone listening who was a student or a researcher or just spending any amount of time in a library in the late 90s or early 2000s, the word InfoTrac carries an immense amount of nostalgia.
Oh, absolutely. It was everywhere.
Before the internet was everywhere, InfoTrac was the bridge.
It was the defining technological leap for an entire generation of researchers.
How did it work before that?
Well, before InfoTrac, if you used a physical index to find a citation for a magazine article, you still had the physical burden of locating that article.
Right, you'd get a slip of paper that says, "Go find Time magazine" from October 1982.
Exactly. You had to walk to the periodical section, hope the issue wasn't checked out or stolen, or load up a reel of microfilm and just scroll through it until you were dizzy.
I remember the microfilm machines. They were awful.
They were.
Yeah.
InfoTrac revolutionized that entire workflow by utilizing CD-ROM technology.
I remember the setup so vividly. You would walk into the library and there would be this dedicated, bulky desktop computer hooked up to a literal tower of CD-ROM drives.
The multimedia towers.
Yes. And the library would receive updated CD-ROMs in the mail every single month from the publisher.
Physical updates in the mail.
You would type in your search, and the machine would physically whir as it spun up the disk to find your article.
You could hear it thinking.
You really could.
And while the user interface might seem laughably clunky by today's standards, the back-end achievement was monumental.
Because it wasn't just citations anymore.
Right. InfoTrac began offering the full text of magazine and newspaper articles right there on the screen.
You didn't have to go find the magazine.
You didn't just get a citation, you got the actual text. So when Thomson merged Information Access Company with Gale and Primary Source Media in '98, they created an entity that offered a complete closed-loop research ecosystem.
A one-stop shop.
A student could sit down at a terminal, get the broad overview of a topic from a Gale encyclopedia, read the historical context from Primary Source Media, and pull current news and magazine articles from InfoTrac.
All from one interface.
Exactly.
But the logistical reality of making those three completely different systems talk to each other must have been an absolute nightmare.
It's hard to overstate how difficult it was.
Because you were taking centuries-old primary sources, mid-century physical reference books, and modern monthly periodical data, and trying to force them all under one digital umbrella called the Gale Group.
Right.
How do you even begin to standardize that data?
It required an unprecedented investment in data structuring and digitization. People often say, oh, they just digitized the archives as if someone just ran a bunch of books through a high-speed scanner.
Right, like making a PDF.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the reality of digitizing decades of physical archives in the late 1990s was incredibly fraught.
Because the tech was so new.
Right. They were relying on early optical character recognition, or OCR technology.
And OCR back then was pretty rough.
OCR programs at the time struggled immensely with older texts. If you were trying to digitize an 18th century primary source, the OCR might read a faded letter E as a C.
Or long as an F.
Yes. Or completely failed to recognize old typesetting ligatures. Gale had to invest heavily not just in scanning, but in the metadata.
The hidden tags.
The unseen tags and categories that actually make a document searchable. They had to build a unified taxonomy.
So what does that look like in practice?
It means that a search for American Civil War would simultaneously pull the correct encyclopedia entry, the 1860s newspaper clipping, and the 1998 academic journal article.
Which is something we take entirely for granted now when we use a search bar.
Completely. But they had to invent that plumbing.
And once they built that unified digital infrastructure, they essentially had the ultimate delivery system. They had built the pipes.
The best pipes in the industry.
And when a massive corporation builds the best pipes in the industry, the next logical step is to buy up all the premium water you can find to push through those pipes.
Naturally.
Which leads us to the turn of the millennium and Gale's absolute shopping spree of legacy publishing brands.
The infrastructure basically demanded content. Thomson Gale realized that while having a great search engine is important, the true value for an academic library lies in the prestige and authority of the texts being searched.
It doesn't matter how fast the search is if the results are garbage.
Exactly. So they targeted the most respected names in the publishing world.
Our sources detailed this dizzying series of acquisitions.
Mhm.
In 1999, Thomson Gale acquired Macmillan Library Reference.
A huge move.
But Macmillan wasn't just one brand. That acquisition included a portfolio of legendary imprints. Scribner's Reference, Thorndike Press, Shermer Twain Publishers, and G.K. Hall.
All under one umbrella.
They bought this entire block from Pearson, and the following year, in 2000, they crossed the Atlantic and acquired a Munich-based publisher called KG Saar Verlag.
Though it's worth noting, they later sold Saar to Walter de Gruyter in 2006.
Right, they didn't hold on to that one forever. But I want to focus on that Macmillan and Scribner's acquisition because it highlights something really important about how these massive corporations treat intellectual history.
It really does. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how authoritative knowledge is essentially traded like a financial instrument.
Like a stock portfolio.
Exactly. The paper trail on the Macmillan portfolio is incredibly revealing. In 1994, Simon & Schuster bought Macmillan USA.
Okay.
Just 4 years later, in 1998, Pearson acquired the educational and reference divisions from Simon & Schuster.
So it moves from one giant to another.
And then a mere year after that, Pearson sold the Macmillan Library reference portion to Thomson Gale.
That's so fast.
Within a 5-year window, some of the most deeply respected academic texts in the world were bounced between 3 different multi-billion-dollar conglomerates.
It's a corporate game of musical chairs.
It really is.
But the music eventually stops and Thomson Gale gets the seat. And the prize is immense.
Unquantifiable, really.
When they acquired Scribner's Reference, they didn't just get data. They became the exclusive owners of absolute heavyweights, like the Dictionary of the Middle Ages and the Dictionary of Scientific Biography.
Those are foundational texts.
Right. For a layman, those might just sound like big books. But in the academic world, the Dictionary of Scientific Biography isn't just a book.
Not at all.
It is the definitive, authoritative text on the history of science.
That is the crucial distinction here. When you acquire a text of that caliber, you are not just a database company anymore.
What are you?
You are the gatekeeper of academic legitimacy. The Dictionary of Scientific Biography was originally published under the auspices of the American Council of Learned Societies.
So it has the official stamp of approval.
It represents the consensus of the world's leading historians of science. By bringing that text, along with Twain's literary criticisms and Shermer's music encyclopedias, into the Gale digital ecosystem.
Thomson ensured that their platform was non-negotiable for universities.
Exactly.
Because if a university library cancels their Gale subscription, they aren't just losing a search interface.
No, they are losing access to the foundational texts of entire academic disciplines.
Which the professors demand.
Right, and this is why this corporate history matters directly to you, the listener.
It affects everyday people.
The consolidation of these imprints dictates the intellectual diet of millions of students and researchers.
How so? Give me an example.
If you are taking a class on medieval history and you log into your university library portal to research a paper, the database will likely steer you toward the Dictionary of the Middle Ages.
Because it's heavily integrated into the search.
Right. You might think you are simply accessing the library, quote-unquote, but you are actually accessing the specific portfolio of assets that Thomson Gale managed to acquire in 1999.
That is wild to think about. They successfully gathered the most authoritative voices in human history under one roof in Farmington Hills.
They built an absolute powerhouse.
They had the digital delivery system, they pioneered with InfoTrac, they had the primary sources, and now they had the unquestioned prestige of Macmillan and Scribner's.
They had the whole package.
They were generating massive recurring revenue from institutional subscriptions all over the globe. They had effectively won the game.
They were at the top of the mountain.
Which makes the next event in our source material completely baffling.
It really is shocking.
Just as they reach the pinnacle of the academic reference world, the parent company decides to tear the whole thing down.
It is one of the most drastic, counterintuitive pivots in modern corporate history.
It makes no sense on paper.
Thomson had spent over 2 decades and hundreds of millions of dollars meticulously assembling this unmatched portfolio.
Decades of work.
And then at the absolute height of their dominance, they simply decided they didn't want to be in the library business anymore.
Our sources pinpoint the exact date this happened, October 25, 2006.
A massive day in publishing.
The CEO of Thomson Corporation, a man named Richard Harrington, makes a public announcement. He states that Thomson intends to wholly divest its Thomson Learning division.
Meaning they are selling it all.
Right. They're putting the entire educational and library empire, including Gale, up for sale.
Just putting a for sale sign on the lawn.
And the justification he gives is stunningly brief. He says that the division does not fit with our long-term strategic vision.
Which is ultimate corporate speak.
Right. How do you justify that? How does a multi-billion-dollar cornerstone of global education suddenly not fit the vision?
You have to look at the broader landscape of the global information economy in 2006 to understand that decision.
Set the scene for us.
Well, Thomson was a massive conglomerate, and education was only one piece of their pie. They were also heavily invested in highly specialized high-speed data for corporate clients.
Like what kind of data?
Specifically financial data, legal databases like Westlaw and healthcare informatics.
Oh, okay. So Wall Street and law firms?
Exactly. When the Thomson board looked at their portfolio, they saw two different futures. On one hand, they had corporate and financial data, where banks and law firms are willing to pay astronomical, constantly increasing subscription fees for real-time information.
Because that data makes the money immediately.
Right. The growth margins there were perceived as virtually limitless.
And on the other hand, you have libraries and public schools.
Precisely. As successful and profitable as Thomson Gale was, its primary customers were municipalities, state universities, and public school districts.
Which are not flush with cash.
No. Those entities are bound by tax revenues and rigid annual budgets. There is a hard ceiling on how much you can increase a public library's subscription fee before they simply cannot pay it.
The library will just say no.
Thomson looked at that hard ceiling and decided that the steady, reliable world of academic reference wasn't aggressive enough for their future.
They wanted high-tech, high-speed growth.
So they decided to cash out. At the time of the announcement, Thomson executives publicly stated they expected the sale of the learning division to generate around $5 billion.
$5 billion is a monumental valuation.
It's massive.
But the wild part is they severely underestimated the market demand.
They really did.
When the sale finally went through in 2007, Thomson Learning didn't sell for $5 billion. It was purchased by a private equity consortium for a staggering $7.75 billion.
$7.75 billion.
Let that number sink in. $7.75 billion for a company that makes its money selling research databases to libraries and textbooks to college students.
It's almost hard to comprehend.
The consortium was made up of Apax Partners and OMERS Capital Partners. And upon the completion of this massive sale on July 24, 2007, Thomson Learning was officially rebranded as Cengage Learning.
The entrance of private equity at this scale into the educational publishing market fundamentally alters the DNA of the company.
We have to unpack the mechanics of a transaction like this.
We do, because a $7.75 billion buyout isn't just a simple cash purchase. It is a leveraged buyout, or LBO.
Okay, break that down for us. What is a leverage buyout?
When Apax Partners, which is a massive global private equity firm, and OMERS Capital Partners, which is actually the investment arm of the Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement System.
Which is basically a massive Canadian pension fund, right?
Yes. When they decide to buy a company for nearly $8 billion, they don't use their own cash for the whole amount.
That would be too risky.
Way too risky. They borrow a massive portion of the purchase price.
So they take out a huge loan to buy the company. But who is responsible for paying that loan back?
The company being purchased.
Wait, what?
Yes. In a leveraged buyout, the debt used to finance the acquisition is placed directly on the balance sheet of the acquired company.
So overnight, Cengage Learning is born, but it is born carrying billions of dollars in new corporate debt.
Instantly. The private equity firms calculate that the steady recurring subscription revenue from all those library databases will be enough to service the massive interest payments on that debt.
While still generating a profit for the private equity guys.
Exactly. They looked at the Encyclopedia of Associations and the digital architecture of Gale OneFile, and they saw a remarkably stable cash-generating engine.
It is such a jarring juxtaposition.
It really is.
On one side, you have the quiet, meticulous work of librarians and historians indexing the Dictionary of Literary Biography.
Very academic, very slow.
Right. On the other side, you have Wall Street private equity managers using those indexes to secure billions of dollars in mezzanine debt.
Two completely different worlds colliding.
But the financial modeling by Apax and OMERS hinged on one critical assumption, right?
Yes, that the global economy, and by extension library budgets, would remain relatively stable.
Which brings us to the timing of this deal. They execute a $7.75 billion buyout in the summer of 2007.
The absolute peak of the market.
Right before the crash.
The timing could not have been more disastrous. They bought at the very top of the bubble just months before the catastrophic 2008 global financial crisis.
So what does this all mean for Cengage and Gale?
It means they step out into the world as an independent entity carrying an unimaginably heavy debt load right as the global economy walks off a cliff.
It's the worst possible scenario.
It's a perfect storm of financial pressure. Our sources note that Patrick C. Summers took over as president of Gale in October 2007, right as the storm clouds were gathering.
And he served through 2010 right during the worst of it.
Yes, the environment he had to navigate was unprecedented. As the financial crisis took hold in 2008 and 2009, tax revenues plummeted globally.
And when tax revenues drop, municipalities are forced to slash budgets across the board.
And public libraries and state universities were hit incredibly hard.
So suddenly, the recurring subscription revenue that the private equity firms had counted on to pay off the buyout debt was under severe threat.
Libraries were forced to negotiate lower rates or cancel subscriptions entirely. They just didn't have the funds.
And while their revenue is being squeezed by the recession, they are also facing an existential technological shift at the exact same time.
The late 2000s is when the transition from print to digital accelerated from a steady walk into an absolute sprint.
The iPhone comes out in 2007.
Exactly. Students suddenly expect everything to be instantly accessible on mobile devices.
They don't want to go to the computer lab anymore.
Right. Cengage couldn't just maintain their old CD-ROMs and print encyclopedias. They had to invest massive amounts of capital into completely rebuilding their digital platforms for the modern web.
But how do you do that when you have all that debt?
You can't. That was the vice they were caught in. They needed hundreds of millions in free cash flow to invest in new software, modern user interfaces, and entirely new digital learning platforms just to stay competitive.
But all of their free cash flow is being siphoned off.
Yes, to pay the interest on the multi-billion-dollar debt from the 2007 leveraged buyout.
The financial math simply broke down.
Despite having incredibly valuable products, a prestigious catalog, and a captive audience of researchers, the capital structure of the company became entirely unsustainable.
And that pressure eventually broke the dam.
It had to.
In 2013, the inevitable happened. Cengage Learning filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection.
It is a stunning, whiplash-inducing arc.
It really is. In 2007, they are valued at $7.75 billion in a record-breaking buyout. Just 6 years later, they are in bankruptcy court.
It is a stark lesson in the difference between a company's operational health and its financial structure.
Because operationally, they were fine.
Operationally, Gale was still producing vital, heavily utilized research tools. Students were still logging into Gale Academic OneFile millions of times a day.
The core product was essential.
The bankruptcy was purely a mechanism to fix the balance sheet. And Chapter 11 restructuring is very different from Chapter 7 liquidation.
Right. In Chapter 11, the company doesn't shut down.
Exactly. The servers have to stay on. The databases have to remain accessible. Because if the platform goes dark, even for a day, the institutional trust is broken forever.
I think that is a crucial point to emphasize for the listener. When a company that controls the digital infrastructure of human knowledge goes bankrupt, it isn't like a retail store closing its doors.
No, you don't just put up a closed sign.
If a massive educational publisher fails to navigate a restructuring, the impact ripples through the entire academic world.
The stakes are incredibly high. During the Chapter 11 process, Cengage was able to secure what is called debtor-in-possession financing.
Which essentially kept the lights on.
Kept the lights on and the servers running while they negotiated with their creditors.
No.
They successfully managed to shed billions of dollars in debt, wiping out much of the original equity value, but emerging as a financially viable entity.
With a much cleaner balance sheet?
It allowed them to finally redirect their revenue away from crushing interest payments and back into technological innovation.
And they did survive. Cengage emerged from the bankruptcy, and Gale remained a foundational, highly profitable pillar of their business.
The survivor.
In fact, if you look at the source material detailing Gale's current product ecosystem, the sheer scope of what they managed to build and maintain through all that corporate volatility is almost hard to comprehend.
It is a sprawling, wildly diverse empire.
The diversity of the catalog is what makes Gale so unique in the publishing world.
They aren't just an academic database company, they are a comprehensive library supplier.
Let's look at the database side first. You have the massive general-purpose engines like Gale Academic OneFile and General OneFile.
These are the direct descendants of InfoTrac.
Right. They contain millions of full-text articles from peer-reviewed journals, major newspapers, and international magazines.
They are the default starting point for millions of undergraduate research papers.
But then they have these incredibly specialized deep archive collections. The sources mention the World History Collection and something called Sabin Americana.
Sabin Americana is a perfect example of what we discussed earlier, taking a physical legacy and turning it into a digital asset.
The sources note it is based on Joseph Sabin's monumental bibliography, Bibliotheca Americana. Who was Joseph Sabin?
Joseph Sabin was a 19th century bookseller. He attempted to catalog every book, pamphlet, and broadside printed in or about the Americas from the time of Columbus up through the late 1800s.
That is an insane project for one guy.
It was a life's work. And Gale took that massive physical bibliography, tracked down the original primary sources, digitized them, and built a searchable database.
So a researcher today can instantly pull up the digital scan of a political pamphlet printed in Boston in 1770.
It is an invaluable resource for historians.
And right alongside these cutting-edge digital archives, Gale maintains some products that feel like they belong in a museum.
They really do.
The sources highlight the Biography and Genealogy Master Index, and the source material specifically cites a review that describes this particular index as a throwback to another era.
I find that fascinating.
Me too. In an era of AI and instant search, why does a throwback product still exist?
I love that description because it highlights the enduring value of structured metadata. The Biography and Genealogy Master Index is essentially an index of indexes.
What does that mean exactly?
Before the internet, if you were trying to find biographical information on a relatively obscure historical figure, you couldn't just guess which encyclopedia they might be in.
You'd be looking forever.
Right, you would consult the master index, and it would tell you the person you were looking for is detailed in Volume 4 of the Dictionary of American Biography and Volume 2 of the Encyclopedia of World Biography.
So it didn't give you the answer, it gave you the map to find the answer.
It tells you exactly where to look on the physical shelf.
And even though Gale's platform is now digital, that master map remains incredibly useful for genealogists and specialized researchers.
It is a surviving artifact of classical, meticulous library science, seamlessly adapted to live on a modern server.
It proves that sometimes the old way of organizing information is still the most efficient.
Absolutely.
But Gale's portfolio doesn't stop at academia and genealogy. This is the part of the source material that completely blew my mind.
It's quite the left turn.
When you look at their print imprints, they still operate Primary Source Media and the TFT Group, but they also own 5-Star Publishing.
Yes, they do.
And 5-Star Publishing is a fiction imprint. According to the sources, they have hundreds of books in print covering Westerns, romance, mystery, and science fiction.
It is a remarkable juxtaposition.
You have the exact same corporate entity that maintains the rigorous, peer-reviewed servers for the Dictionary of Scientific Biography, simultaneously publishing mass-market cowboy westerns and cozy mysteries.
To an outsider, it seems completely disjointed. But if you understand the business model, it makes perfect sense.
How?
Gale's primary customer isn't the individual student. It is the library.
And public libraries have to serve the entire community, not just people writing doctoral theses.
Precisely. A public library director has a single procurement budget. They need academic databases for the local high school students, but they also need a steady stream of large print romance novels and genre fiction for their senior patrons.
So Gale just supplies both.
Gale looked at that procurement process and realized they could capture more of the library's budget by offering bundled solutions. This is often referred to as the big deal model in publishing.
So they pitch it as a package.
Gale can go to a library system and say, if you renew your subscription to General OneFile, we will bundle in a massive discount on a standing order of 5-star fiction titles and large print books.
They have positioned themselves as the ultimate one-stop shop.
They really have.
The extent of that one-stop shop is hilarious when you really look at it. Beyond fiction, they own large print publishers like Christian Large Print and Wheeler Publishing.
They serve the K-12 market with imprints like UXL.
They have digital learning platforms for college students like WebAssign. And perhaps the most unexpected connection of all Gale is the company behind Chilton.
The auto repair manuals.
Yes, the Chilton auto repair manuals. I remember my dad having a greasy, dog-eared Chilton manual in the garage to help him fix the transmission on his truck.
It's an American staple.
It is absolutely amazing to me that if you trace the corporate lineage of that truck repair guide all the way up the ladder, it sits on the exact same corporate server farm in Michigan as the New Catholic Encyclopedia.
It is the perfect illustration of how deeply embedded Cengage and Gale are in our daily informational infrastructure.
They really cover everything.
Whether you are trying to fix a faulty spark plug, researching the socioeconomic impacts of the Industrial Revolution, or just reading a large print mystery novel on a Sunday afternoon gale is quietly providing the material.
They have successfully monetized almost every conceivable intersection of human curiosity.
But as with any massive technological system, building and acquiring this unprecedented digital catalog comes with significant inherent risks.
And that brings us to the vulnerabilities of the digital age.
We have talked a lot about the triumphs of their digital transition, but the source material also points us toward a slightly darker corner of Gale's history.
The digital graveyard.
The digital graveyard. Our sources mention two specific properties owned by Gale that serve as a stark warning about the ephemerality of digital data.
The first is Gale Research, which the sources list as inactive, noting it was essentially folded into encyclopedia.com.
And the second one is Questia Online Library, and Questia is listed as entirely defunct.
This raises an important question about digital preservation and the fundamental promise of the internet, doesn't it?
It does. For years, Questia was marketed as a premier standalone online library. It was a massive digital repository containing nearly 100,000 full textbooks and millions of articles.
This is huge for freelancers.
It was particularly beloved by independent researchers, freelance writers, and students who didn't have access to a university library portal.
They could just buy a subscription.
They paid a direct subscription fee for access to this incredible curated collection. It was literally an entire library living in the cloud.
But what happens when the massive corporation that owns that cloud decides to change its strategy?
Well, the library closes permanently.
And the difference between a physical library closing and a digital library closing is terrifying.
It's night and day.
If a physical library goes bankrupt, the building might be locked, but the books still exist in the world.
They might be sold off or donated to another institution or auctioned. The physical objects endure.
But when a digital library like Questia goes defunct, the access simply evaporates.
The company just flips a switch on a server.
The URLs lead to error pages. The entire curated collection of the bookmarks people saved the specific organization of that data. It is just gone.
It is a profound reminder of the fragility of our modern digital resources.
Mm-hmm.
The internet has conditioned us to assume that data is permanent.
We bookmark links. We cite specific URLs in our academic research. We build syllabi around digital reading lists.
All operating under the assumption that the digital architecture will always be there. But the reality is that these platforms are heavily subject to the whims of corporate strategy, profitability metrics, and the kind of bankruptcy restructuring we discussed earlier.
When a digital asset is no longer deemed a fit for the long-term strategic vision, to borrow Richard Harrington's phrase from 2006, it can be erased from the public sphere.
Exactly. The cost of maintaining legacy servers, updating security protocols, and migrating old databases to new web standards is incredibly high.
It's not free to keep a website running.
No, it's very expensive. And if a platform like Questia isn't generating enough revenue to justify that maintenance, a corporate board will simply shut it down.
The ephemerality of data,
That we often call link rot, is one of the great historical challenges of our time.
The fate of Questia is a stark, unavoidable example of what happens when the maintenance of our digital heritage is entirely dependent on the corporate health and strategic priorities of private entities.
It really makes you reconsider all those permanent links you've saved over the years. You are placing a massive amount of unstated trust in the financial stability of companies like Cengage.
It has been an incredible, sweeping arc to unpack today.
It really has.
We started in 1954 with Frederick Gale Ruffner Jr. sitting in a Detroit office utilizing index cards and the Postal Service to painstakingly organize physical reference books.
A completely analog world.
We watched that analog vision get acquired by a global conglomerate merged with the cutting-edge 1990s digital technology of InfoTrac and absorbed some of the most prestigious legacy publishers in human history, from Macmillan to Scribner's.
Just massive corporate consolidation.
Then we saw the entire empire sold to private equity for $7.75 billion at the absolute peak of a financial bubble.
Survive a grueling Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
And emerge as a sprawling modern ecosystem that provides everything from academic primary sources to Western novels and car repair manuals.
All still operating out of their headquarters in Farmington Hills, Michigan.
It is a remarkable corporate journey, but it leaves us with a critical philosophical reality to confront.
As corporate consolidation in the publishing and educational technology sectors continues to accelerate, we are moving toward a future where the vast majority of human history, scientific discovery and primary source media, is filtered, indexed, packaged, and leased back to us by just a handful of massive, private corporate entities.
That is a heavy thought.
If the keys to the library, the actual digital mechanisms by which we discover, verify, and understand our world, ultimately belong to a private equity firm managing a cloud server who really controls the narrative of our history.
It's a structural reality that every researcher, student, and curious citizen should carefully consider as we continue to build our lives in the digital sphere.
Absolutely.
That is a phenomenal point to leave on. The next time you are sitting at your local library or logging into your university portal from home and you type a query into that search bar, take just a second.
Look behind the curtain.
Scroll down to the very bottom of the screen or look at the copyright page of the result you click on. Look for the name Gale or Cengage, because now you know the epic, volatile, multi-billion-dollar history behind the invisible engine that is powering your curiosity.
It's all connected.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, and we will see you next time.